A far-right Israeli minister is currently being slammed by Western allies. Why? Well, he suggested that starving to death 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, it's not just happening. He argues that it's moral and that it's justified until the hostages are returned. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said, unfortunately, Israel had no choice but to send humanitarian aid to Gaza. Speaking at a conference in support of Jewish settlements, the minister said this: "It's not possible in today's global reality to imagine a war. No one will allow us to starve 2 million people, even though that might be just and moral. That might be just and moral until they return the hostages." Now, I need to give you all some quick context here. One, that's just disgusting on its own. But Benjamin Netanyahu has always been trash as a prime minister. He's always been on the wrong side of issues. He's always skirted international law. He's always disrespected humanitarian conventions. Benjamin Netanyahu represents all that is bad. But when Benjamin Netanyahu was able to return to office, resume the prime ministership, he was only able to do so by forming a coalition, because you don't just get elected prime minister. There's a coalition that needs to be built within the Knesset, and he needed to have a coalition of people to keep him in power, and that coalition is moving him further and further to the right. So as disgusting as Netanyahu has been in this most recent term, he now has been pulled to the right by people like Yoav Gallant, by people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, and by people like Bezalel Smotrich, the person we're talking about right now. These are people who don't even pretend to want a two-state solution. These are people who don't even pretend to believe that Palestinians are entitled to any land. These are people who simply want Palestine to go away and Palestinians to die. And that is why what you heard from Bezalel Smotrich today is so disgusting. And the Biden administration even called it out. And that's how you know it's bad, because the Biden administration usually don't say nothing against Israel. But today they called it out. The Biden administration called the remarks appalling. The European Union condemned the remarks by reminding Israel, quote, "The deliberate starvation of civilians is a war crime." It's crazy that you have to remind people that you can't starve people. Britain's new foreign secretary, David Lammy, also responded, posting this on X: "There can be no justification for Minister Smotrich's remarks, and we expect the wider Israeli government to retract and condemn them." I'll hold my breath for that. Germany's ambassador to Israel, Stefan Silbert, called the remarks, quote, "unacceptable and appalling." Egypt's foreign ministry described the statements as shameful and unacceptable in form and substance. Unacceptable in form and substance. They also added that, quote, "irresponsible statements create incitement against Palestinians in Gaza." That's right. It's not just disgusting and deplorable. It's also illegal. But it's not just illegal, it's also dangerous. And you set the tone of saying that these Palestinians deserve to die, and feeding them isn't necessary, and feeding them, it might be moral and just. Not feeding them is moral and just. Starving them is moral and just. When you send that message, it makes it easier for humanitarian aid trucks to not make it through. It makes it easier for people to shoot them. It makes it easier for global humanitarian efforts from groups like the World Central Kitchen. It makes it easier for them to get killed in cold blood. It makes it easier to watch the misery if you think that Palestinians deserve it. What Smotrich said, though, is not an outlier. I'd love to believe, and the world would love to believe, that he is the exception to an otherwise normal, liberal, diplomatic, progressive rule. No, 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 no. This man is full of evil and animus and hate toward the Palestinian people, but he is not isolated. The dominant Israeli policy position toward Palestinians is let them starve. The dominant Israeli policy position toward Palestinians is let them die. We got to do something about that. Right now, we ain't doing much. The Israeli minister, finance minister, as we're talking about right now, Smotrich, the defense minister, the prime minister, for God's sake. They all must be held accountable for not just their statements, but the policies that come and are reflected by those statements. They all must be challenged.